Okay, tonight is Genesis chapter 40.
And it came to pass after these things, that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers, and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward.
We left off at the end of chapter 39 with Joseph being put in prison, and it was noted that he was a model prisoner, such that he was given responsibility in the prison and so forth. So that's the case as we open chapter 40. Right? So as you see in the first few verses here, there's some new prisoners introduced to the place now. It says the butler and the baker of the Pharaoh. But it says in verse 2, it calls them the chief of the butler and the chief of the bakers. So in other words, they were like the head guy for each of those areas of the butler staff and the baker staff. Okay. And now it says that Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, these two, and so therefore he put them in prison in verse 3, the place where Joseph was bound. Okay. Now, first of all, who were these? They were obviously people who reported to Pharaoh. They had a certain job that they did, and it sounded like they were overseers of that particular function. Now, why was Pharaoh angry with them? It's never really been said, and I read some interesting conjecture. Again, for both of them to be in prison at the same time was sound like something happened, right? There was some kind of a plot or incident or something must have happened. And so someone raised the possibility, could have been that somebody was trying to poison the Pharaoh's food, maybe, all right? If that's the case, well, the baker would be the one, him and his staff would be the ones making the food, and the butler and his staff would be the ones bringing it to him. So, it's a possibility if it was something like that. Because again, why these two? And, they would have been the heads of the two areas, so I guess they would have been the ones, perhaps responsible, and maybe not knowing, well, who actually did this? Was it the one who made it, or when they brought it, did they introduce it? Again, it's just kind of a fun thing to think about. It doesn't say anything about that, just says he was angry at them, at both of them, and so as a result puts them both in prison here in verse 3. And in verse 4, it says that the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them. So he told Joseph to be responsible to them, for them, all right? It says he served them, not that he was overseeing them, all right, but he was like a servant to these special prisoners. So he was able to interact with them and take care of them. He would have been given this responsibility since at the end of the previous chapter it was noted he was a responsible man, and things prospered when he was involved and so forth. All right, so in verse 4, when it says the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, it would be whoever was maybe responsible for that area. If you remember, though, in the previous chapter, it noted that the captain of the guard was Potiphar, the man that Joseph was working for. So it's possible it was the same man here, in which case he would have known Joseph. Obviously, he was responsible, a good servant, etc. So it could have been him. Now, it doesn't mention his name, so it could be by this time he was no longer in that position, Potiphar, and maybe it was somebody else. Right? But it was the same job, because it said the captain of the guard. So whoever was in that position, whether Potiphar or somebody else, had gotten to know Joseph enough that he was able to trust him to serve these two special prisoners. And I call them special prisoners because they reported directly to Pharaoh as the chief of the bakers and the chief of the butlers.
And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning, and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you.
So now on this particular day, it turns out that both of these men have had dreams the night before. Right? It's in verse 5, it says they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night. So they happened the same night. So you can picture the two of them getting up the next morning and they're talking to each other saying, yeah, boy, I had a dream last night. It's a crazy dream. I don't know what it meant. Really, I had a dream too. I don't know what that meant either. Right? And so they're going back and forth. Right? It says, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker, which were bound in prison. Right? So Joseph came in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. Right? They were sad because they were like perplexed. We had this dream. I had this dream. I don't know what it means. I had this dream. I don't know what it means. Right? So that's what happens in verse 7. It says he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the war of the prison, saying, "Why are you so sad?" And they said, "We dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it." Right? They figured that there had to be some meaning to this, especially since they both had the dream, and it was, it wasn't the same dream. There was, there were different details, but yet it seemed like both of them were roughly similar. So it's like, well, what does it mean? What does it mean? So they were sad because we have nobody to interpret it. Now Joseph's response here at the end of verse 8 says, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you." Interesting response, all right? Because if you think back to when Joseph had dreams about the all the sheaves bowing down to his sheaf, and the moon and the stars bowing down and so forth, it didn't sound back then that he knew what the interpretation of those were. So I mean, I don't know that I would go as far as to say that was his gift, was interpreting dreams, because he seemed relatively clueless as to what they meant, and it was his family that jumped on and said, "Really? You saying this dream and this means this?" So it wasn't necessarily his thing to figure it out, but yet now he's saying God is the one who provides the interpretation. So he must have been inspired to say that, right? An inspired response to say that, tell me the dreams and God will give me the interpretation.
And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, "In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand." And Joseph said unto him, "This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head, and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner when thou wast his butler."
Okay, so the chief butler goes first, right, and says, here's my dream. In my dream, I see a vine with 3 branches, and the blossoms come out, and it brings forth ripe grapes. Okay. And this is Pharaoh's cup. I had Pharaoh's cup, and I took those grapes and I put them in the cup. All right, so you think of what that dream is, and it's probably a relatively short dream, right? Where he sees these grapes growing, and he takes them and he pushes them into Pharaoh's cup, right? And he puts the cup in Pharaoh's hand, right? So that was his dream, right? So Joseph has the interpretation. He says the 3 branches are 3 days. Right? Now again, an interesting observation. That clearly, it has to be divinely inspired, because like I said, if someone told me they had a dream and they saw 3 branches of grapes, that would not be the first thought that came to my mind. That means something's going to happen in 3 days because there were 3 branches. But that's what he said. He said the 3 branches are 3 days, right? And within 3 days, says Pharaoh is going to restore you to your previous job. Right? In other words, you're going to be cleared of the charges, whatever they were. Right, and of course his job was to deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand. All right, and so in the dream, that's what he was doing. He was giving Pharaoh the cup as he had done. And so Joseph said, that's what's going to happen. Within 3 days, you're going to be put back into your job after the former manner when thou was his butler. All right, so that was the interpretation. Good news. I'm sure he was excited to hear that. Cool. All right, and one would assume that that was the right answer, even that whatever the charges were, he was going to be deemed innocent of them and therefore restored to his former position.
"But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon."
So after Joseph has shared the interpretation of the chief butler's dream, I'm sure the butler was excited. Good, in 3 days I'm going to be back, back doing my job. I'm going to be cleared. So Joseph adds, when that happens, remember me. Okay, remember me when you're back interacting with Pharaoh himself. He says, when it's well with you, show kindness to me and make mention of me unto Pharaoh so I can get out of here. Right? Because in 15 he says, I don't really even belong here. 15 he says, I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews. Of course, he doesn't mention it was his own brothers who sold him. And here I've done nothing to warrant being in this dungeon. Okay, so he says, I'm happy to provide the interpretation. I'm happy of your dream. I'm happy it's going to turn out well for you, that you're going to get your previous job back. Especially if you've done nothing wrong, then you don't need to be here. So things are going to work out well for you. Well, help things work out well for me. I don't belong here either. I haven't done anything wrong. So when you have Pharaoh's ear, you're giving him his cup. Tell him about me here in this prison so maybe I can get out of here.
When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket there was of all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee.
So the chief baker is, of course, witnessing this whole conversation, and has heard the butler tell his dream, and saw Joseph interpret it, and it's like, yeah, that's good interpretation. Yeah, that's good. A happy ending. I like it. So it says in 16, is when he saw the interpretation was good, so Joseph, okay, now I'll tell you my dream. All right, so in his dream it says 3 white baskets on his head, and the uppermost basket was all manner of baked meats, and the birds came and ate them out of the basket on my head. All right. So as you can see, obviously it's not the same dream as the other one, but still things were happening involving, baked goods, which would have been his job and such. So again, maybe he's thinking that it's going to be the same interpretation. Unfortunately for him, not the case, right? As it says in 18, it says Joseph answered and says, okay, the 3 baskets are 3 days. So we're talking the same time frame. It says within 3 days, he says Pharaoh is going to basically cut off your head and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from off thee. Okay? Not exactly the kind of interpretation he was looking for, right? It's the exact opposite, really, of what the other one received. Now, as you hear that, right? I would tend to believe that what was going to happen within 3 days was that the truth was going to come out regarding whatever these 2 men were accused of. And just using the example that I threw out as a wild possibility that there was some plot to murder Pharaoh, poison his food, and so forth. So maybe it came out that it was the baker was the one who put it in, and the butler was just innocently delivering it. Again, how they determined that, who knows? All that detail's not included in the story. But if you wanted to go down that path, we'll say that within 3 days it was going to be found out the baker was the one who did it. And what gives you a clue that could well be the case was his hesitancy to share the dream in the first place. See, the butler didn't hesitate because he knew he was innocent. So he's just waiting to get out. So here, I had a dream. Does this mean I'm getting out, that the truth's going to come out? Whereas the baker held back and didn't give his interpretation until he saw that the butler got a good interpretation. So maybe he's saying, maybe I'm going to get away with it, is the way I would interpret it. But based on what the interpretation is, it sounds like he probably was guilty, and it was going to be found out, and then he was going to be executed by Pharaoh after 3 days.
And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him.
And interestingly, both dreams were pointing to a 3-day time period, and it just so happens that 3 days later, it's Pharaoh's birthday, right? So the 3 days was actually significant. And since it was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast, and so forth. So you could probably fill in the blanks that this was probably why they wanted to figure out who was innocent, who was guilty. It was going to be a big feast and a celebration and so forth, so he would have liked to have had both of his key officers back in place So we need to decide and figure out who tried to kill me or who did whatever it was that he was accused of, right? So it says it was Pharaoh's birthday, he made a feast and so forth, and he brought back the butler and the baker before him, right? But in 21 it says he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he was back to giving the cup to Pharaoh's hand. But in 22 it says he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted. So of course it worked out exactly as Joseph said it would with the interpretation of the two dreams. So again, we'll conclude that when these two were brought before Pharaoh, it was somehow determined that the butler was innocent, the baker was guilty, so the baker was executed and hanged as his dream had indicated would happen. Right? So now the butler's back in his job, and it would be great to hear of a nice little happy ending here that the butler would say, oh, good, yeah, I'm back in my job, just like Joseph said, and now I can tell Pharaoh, all about Joseph. But unfortunately, in verse 23, it doesn't happen. It says, yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. Right? So with a chance to return the favor, if you will, right? He forgot. He was back in his job and just happy to be back in his job and just thinking about himself, I suppose, and didn't remember Joseph. So for the time being, Joseph is still left in prison, at least until the next chapter.